is a pretty common route, right? Right. So where did he go? He went to all of the Irani scholars, right? In Ray and Khurasan. He went to Baghdad. He went to Makkah and Medina. He went to Basra, right? He went to Fuslat, and he went to Dimashq. Well, here he didn't really go here to seek knowledge, right? It's kind of where he died. he got kicked out. What else do you guys remember about Imam Sa'id? Yeah, had it not been for the fact that he died so late comparatively to the other imams, he would actually probably be higher on the list. Absolutely. Extremely intelligent. Extremely intelligent. He was considered one of the major Naqd, or one of the major Hadith critics. Right? So he was also very versed in the science of ilm, right? In the science of what do you call it? Like advanced Hadith criticism. Yes.
You said he was the most critical.
Right. So his critique of narrators was very precise, very well versed. He has a very famous book, al-Majruhin, right? The weak and abandoned narrator, or the weak and criticized narrators, and a few other books that I think I mentioned. So, Hafiz, well known, here known to be a mujtahid. These were his famous works. His Sunan Nasa'i, we had said that he had two, right? So he had al-Mujtaba and he had Kubra. So what did I say the relationship between these two was? Yeah, so Ibn Sunni was one of his students who narrated al-Mujtaba, right? Which was the smaller one. Right, so there was some research that was done saying that they're basically the same book, but the smaller version is the incomplete version of the larger one. He rahimahullah, we said that, how did he die? What did they ask him specifically?
They asked him about
they asked him about the virtues of Ali. No, not the virtues of Ali. He already had Manaqib Ali, right? So he already had like the virtues of Ali, the virtues of Ali radiallahu anhu. But they asked him about another companion. They said, okay, well, you wrote all this about Ali. Why did you write about? Well, he wasn't at that time. He passed. Yeah. You're right. It was Muawiyah. So he told them, he said, well, you wrote this book about the virtues of Ali, but you haven't written about the virtues of Muawiyah. So he said, okay. He said, because there's only one thing for me to share about Muawiyah, which was what? You guys remember the Hadith? The Prophet ﷺ called for him, and they said he is what? And he responded saying that I'm eating. Right? And then the Prophet ﷺ made dua. What dua did he make? What did he say? He said, Allahumma ya Allah, I hope that, or I pray that your stomach is never full. And ironically, so we have other hadith, so even that can be considered a virtue because the Prophet ﷺ, and what did he say? He said, if I ever make dua against one of my companions, it is it's a blessing for them, or is a raising their rank. So this is the only hadith he knew, and this is when he narrated. Ironically, Muawiyah, he was actually a very heavy-set man during his khilafah. It's actually said that he used to give the khutbah sitting down. So then, after he shared that, what happened? Yeah, Akhi, do you want me to turn the mic off in the musalla so you can have class? Are you sure? Yeah. That between the two khutbahs? Yeah. Sure, but what if you're giving the khutbah sitting down? the sitting down. The problem was the standing. So he wasn't able to hold his weight. So he used to sit down and give khutbah. Not giving a pause. Not standing up, sitting down, and then standing up again. The break between the khutbahs. Allah, I think, well, and Allah knows best. We have to realize that the khutbah is for who? Who attends the khutbah? Huh? Like everyone, right? Everyone attends the khutbah. But does everyone attend a reminder, or does everyone attend the class? No, not really. I'm saying like, I mean, we usually have a little bit better attendance than this. But saying that is that even if we have, what percentage of the community do you think comes to educational programs or reminders or these types of things? Like very small, right? Like a very small percentage. Like, what percentage of the community do you think comes for Jummah? It's actually like 20. They did a survey. Which is kind of upsetting, but it's like 20% of the community comes for Jummah. Which is, I mean, I don't want to say if it's good or bad, but 20%, if you remove women and children, even though women and children come sometimes, even if you remove women and children, like that means like at least half of the people who are supposed to come to Jummah aren't really coming. Why is that? I'm sorry? Right, work is an issue for a lot of people, and then timing for some people. Right, it's very difficult. Some people's just laziness, like this, very honestly. So, in saying that, the Jummah prayer is actually a religious what for men? They have to, right? It's a religious obligation. So this is something that men have to come to. So the reason that men come for Jummah is because what? Because they're like, man, I really enjoy that khutbah, right? I need that 1 hour khutbah, right? Alright, it's mandatory, right? They have to attend. So if you have a population that is coming to a religious obligation, does it make sense to have people who are not used to sitting for a long time to learn, or not used to a classroom setting, to give them like this religious talk? Like to have a long one? Right? It doesn't make sense for it to be particularly long. Why? Because you have people, most of the people who are attending, they're not used to sitting in long gatherings. So one of the ways I can break up something that might be a little bit longer is doing what? Or one of the ways I can make it more palatable, or I can make it a little bit more digestible for people. What are some of the strategies I could use? Right? I could talk about different subjects. What else? I'm sorry, breaking food, right? So there are a lot of masajid, right? So Dar Hijrah is not the only one, right? So after Jummah, what is very common? You go out for lunch, right? And even in the Muslim lands, like what is a very common thing for people to do after Jummah? To go out and eat. It's something that was actually very, like I remember when I was in Saudi, Pakistan, like all the places I went to, like after Jummah, man, there'd be like people selling food, like immediately. Like you go out and you eat. It's a very common thing. Then what else? Having a break. Right, having an intermission for the khutbah. Yes. There are two opinions on where he got that name from. One is that was his mother's name. His mother's name was Majah, so he's very famously named after that. What other scholar do we have that is associated with a female name and not a male name? One you probably guys aren't too familiar with, Ibn Ulayya. Who's the other one? From the famous imams. Abu Hanifa. Good. Abu Hanifa was actually his daughter. Right? Hanifa was actually his daughter. He hasn't come to the Abu Hanifa seerah. Very, very upsetting. He was known as Majah. Some scholars say that Majah was actually his father's nickname. He actually studied Hadith quite a bit. He probably has the most extensive compilation of narrations that have to do with tafsir, that have to do with tafsir of the Quran. Unfortunately, that book has been lost. We don't have it anymore. And he traveled quite a bit, and as we'll see, he is probably one of the more traveled imams from the ones that we mentioned in the 6 books. The only place that we haven't been in is down here, right, in the Yemen region. Do you guys know which scholar or scholars famously traveled to Yemen? We had mentioned it in passing. Yes. Imam Ahmad. Right, so Imam Ahmad. But here he pretty much hit all the major centers and major areas of knowledge. He studied under a number of major scholars. Some of these you might be familiar with, some of them you might not be. Trying to think who stands out here. Ibn Mundhir is one. Abu Bakr ibn Abi Shayba is another one. And the rest of these you guys probably not familiar with. He had a number of students. These are his students, and the most notable ones here. They studied. They're in different places, right? All of these are in Iraq, right? Qazwin, Isfahan, Hamadan, and Baghdad. But these are some of his major students. He was considered a great Hadith scholar. He had a major work of tafsir. The scholars said about him that he was a major hafid also. He was a Naqd, right? He was a critic. He was considered someone who was truthful and upright. In Tazkirat al-Hufaz by Imam al-Dhahabi, he says that he was a great memorizer of a Hadith and a Hadith scholar and a Quran exegete and somebody who did tafsir from Qazwin. He says that he was very trustworthy and an authority and had a deep knowledge of the Hadith sciences. Hatim, he died, I want to say like 100 years ago. He was among the Imams of Hadith. He had a high rank and was pious and a trustworthy scholar by consensus. Muhammad Hatim. Ibn Majah, he wrote some famous works, right? So his Sunan, his Tafsir, and his Tariq. The Sunan is the one that has survived. The Tafsir has not, and the Tariq, I don't think so either. So Ibn Kathir actually had access to them, but we don't have them today. He died in 273, and he is someone who, again, of great stature. Saying that, out of all of the 6 books of Hadith, which one has the highest number of weak Hadith? Weak. That's fine. Ibn Majah. Which book of Hadith has the most fabricated narrations? That's Ibn Majah. But if we look back at his biography, what was his standing as a scholar of Hadith? Was he considered a lower scholar? No, he was considered a major scholar. How is it then that you have this book, you have his Sunan, and it has all of these weak narrations, and then somebody would place it to be from the 6 major books of Islam? Because we do Jarh wa Ta'deel, Allahu Akbar.
Because that was his intention.
Huh?
His intention. Why was that?
Okay, so that's a very good question. What was his intention when he compiled his Sunnah? Okay, that's definitely possible. But what other books do we have that are called Sunnah? You have Nasa'i, you have Abu Dawud, you have the al-Qutni, right? Darimi, right? So you have all these other books that don't have the same percentage or the same number of weak narrations. He also titled his book what? The Sunnah. So what's interesting, and one of my teachers that actually pointed this out, he said that there's a few theses that were written on the subject, and one of the things that you do is when you do a critical edition, or something that's called a tahqiq. How a tahqiq works is that what you'll do is you'll take a number of different manuscripts from the same book, and you'll take one, and then what you'll do is you'll copy it, right? You'll just copy it word for word how it is, and then what you do is you take other manuscripts and you start doing what? You already start comparing. He's like, okay, well, in the one I based it off of, usually, why do I base it off that one? Because it's the most complete, right? Or it's the one that I can find that's the oldest, whatever. People have different criteria for basing that. And then what you do is you start comparing it with these other manuscripts. And then you will put, sometimes you guys will see, like in the bottom, right, in manuscript B, it says da 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 da. In manuscript D, it says da 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 da. Right, so sometimes you can have multiple manuscripts that you base it off of, and sometimes you only have a handful of manuscripts. Sometimes you only have one, which will make your job actually easier, because all you have to do is copy it, right? And then the other thing you can do is you can look, after you get all these manuscripts and you compile it, the next level that you can do is you have something that's called secondary sources. What is a secondary source? Do you guys know? Right, so basically anybody who is referencing them. So, for example, if they say, in Ibn Majah said in hadith number da 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 da, and this is in my book. So somebody later, what can they do? They can come look at my book and use that as a way to compare it to the other manuscripts, like did he agree or did he disagree? Very famously, one of the scholars who actually did do this, right, they actually compared manuscripts, and is a really good reference for us today, is Imam al-Mizzi in his Tuhfat al-Ashraf. And what he did is that he actually takes the 6 books, and he brings all of the hadith in those 6 books, and he compares the different manuscripts and he mentions them. He organizes it by narrators, right? So if there are certain chains, he'll actually put all of the hadith that have the same chain under the same chapter heading. It's just a reorganization of the books, and it makes it easier for researchers to go and find comparative chains, right? So if I want to see, like, okay, does this chain exist in the other books? What can I do? I can go back to Tuhfat al-Ashraf and I can check that. And not just that, Imam al-Mizzi will mention, he'll say like, if there's any addition that Imam al-Tirmidhi makes, or Imam al-Nasa'i, or somebody, if one of them has something to say, he'll have multiple manuscripts and he can actually confirm or deny whether they said it or not. Because what happens later is, sometimes people will say, and وَقَالَ Abu Isa, and Imam al-Tirmidhi, he said that this hadith is hasan, right? But this edition, sometimes what happens is, like, you'll take it from the hadith before and the scribe accidentally put it at the hadith afterward. You guys follow? He just, because you're just copying, right? So what happens is sometimes you copy it wrong and you place his hukam, you place his ruling on the hadith that it actually isn't referring to. So what he did is he actually gathered a bunch of manuscripts, and he was able to, so he's a good reference for that, and it's a good tool that we have available to us today. So going back to Ibn Majah, what was one of the theses that was done, or one of the works that was done on his Sunan was basically on Ibn Majah. Yes? He didn't identify them, no. So Ibn Majah, what this work was, or what this risala was, or what this thesis was, it says basically it was on Ibn Majah and his efforts in Hadith, right? So basically it was just a study of his life, gathering up all of the different historical narrations about him. One of the things he did is he actually did a study of the book, the Sunan itself. And he said, I looked through the different manuscripts looking for the title of the book, and one of the titles that I found was a Sunan wal-Qara'ib. So, what is a Sunan? All the hadith that have to do with rulings. And al-Qara'ib, what are Qara'ib? Like lone or strange reports. Does it make more sense now why there's so many weak hadith in his Sunan? Right? If we assume that that's actually the title, it makes so much more sense, especially for a scholar of his caliber. Right? If we understand that this is a scholar who's of a great caliber, somebody who's versed, somebody who's a Naqd, somebody who's a hadith critic, and somebody who's specialized in it, he wouldn't make the mistake of including all of these weak narrations. Meaning that he actually put those narrations purposely. Right? He actually put those narrations in purposely. Now, what are some of the reasons that we would put weak or fabricated narrations in a book? Awareness. A lot of time it has to do with bringing awareness for that. Or sometimes if we put a chapter heading saying, the virtue of such and such. Many times the hadith that have to do with virtues and falah, they're what? Right, many times they're weak, many times they're fabricated. But if I want to talk about those things, the only thing I can find concerning that issue is going to be weak or fabricated. So what do? I put it in, knowing that the reader, what? Understands. Right? Knowing that the reader understands. And we had said the same thing about like the other books of Hadith. That we don't have a problem with reading those books. Where does the problem come in? Right, why? What am I going to misunderstand?
Because I'm assuming the fact that the hadith is in this book means it has to be.
Right, so that's just one aspect of it. What else?
Trying to extract the
Right, trying to extract the rulings from it. Maybe why? Because I don't have the academic tools to sit down and actually extract rulings from those hadith. So, in general, for a lay Muslim, why should they engage in reading the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ? For both, right? To seek blessing from them and to be closer to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And what are some other benefits that we can get from it? If I already took like a fiqh class, for example, and many times in the fiqh class they won't mention what? Right, the reasoning, right? Many times they won't mention the reasoning, they won't mention what we call the dalil. So if I come across a hadith that agrees with the ruling that my teacher taught me, what can I say? They say, oh, okay, this is probably where that ruling came from. And if I find a hadith that goes against what I was taught, what do? You keep reading. you keep. That's where the barakah comes in, right? You just keep reading. Yeah. No, absolutely. He starts acting on it. Yeah. Sure. Well, not all the time, but there are like a handful of instances where he will actually. The reason he's mentioning it is to bring awareness, is to show that there's some type of weakness. Yeah. Sure. No, listen. I will. Me on a personal level, I will never prevent anyone from reading. Right? I'm not a gatekeeper. I'm not here to stop her. That when we deal with a hadith, when we deal with ayat, that we don't try to extract rulings from them and understanding the lens behind them, because even things that don't have to do with any of these, sometimes things are just abrogated, and I don't know. Right? If I say, well, this ruling no longer applies. If somebody comes, and sometimes the restaurants, they'll do it out of fashion, right? So they'll serve you water in like an alcohol container, right? It'll be like a wine bottle, or it'll be a beer, like a whiskey bottle, but they'll serve you water in it. If we take, based on some of the hadith we took in the Muslim class, what are we going to say? Like, no, this is a problem. I can't even drink from that without knowing what. Huh? No, it's abrogated. So the hadith that had spoken about not drinking out of vessels that were classically used to what? To hold alcohol. He sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, later he said what? He said, I used to not allow you, but now I allow you. Later he said what? He said, I used to. Yeah, because like it's a society that's coming out of alcoholism, right? You know, you're talking about like a huge societal shift. So it's not strange. So here, when we talk about Ibn Majah, we say that if you don't know how to utilize it, you're going to be following a hadith that are not sound.
Sorry, guys.
It contains 37 books, 1,560 chapters, and 4,341 hadith. There are additional books that are the additional hadith. These are considered zawaid. So basically, all the hadith that the previous 5 books did not include, these hadith are included in his sunan. Fuad al-Baqi, he himself was not a muhaddith. But what his contribution was to the hadith literature is that he actually put a numbering system in place. So many of the hadith and the numberings that we see on the hadith today, they were not present before him, and he was like, I think he also died like 100 years ago, so he's not that long And he's the one who actually included this numbering system. Nasruddin al-Albani, I'm sure maybe some of you are familiar with him. He was somebody who worked extensively with the hadith literature. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy on him. But he's actually one of the main reasons I started studying hadith myself. He revived a lot this idea of going back and doing takhrij, which is referencing, doing appropriate referencing, understanding where rulings came from, etc. His biggest shortcoming or his biggest failing was that he would not use the books of ilm, which we said was the last stage of verifying a hadith and whether they were sound or not. So like we said, there are indications in his book of why he wrote it, but like I said, I feel that the titling of the book is the strongest reason or the main reason of why he wrote his book together and why he put it together. And like I said, the Sunan al-Gharaib is probably the correct title for the book, and Allah knows best. There are things that set it apart, right? So the thing is, like his chapter titling is very good, and it actually coincides more so with the abwab al-fiqh that we are more familiar with today. So like the fiqh chapters that we have today, they're well ordered, well arranged, and it is brief, right? So it's a relatively short work comparatively to the other books. And there are several places where he himself says that the hadith are gharib, which again gives an indication on why he titled the book the way that he did. There's additional information that Ibn Majah puts in that you don't find in other books. So one of the things is that he'll actually put where the narrator is from. And why does that help, or why is that useful information? Even more so than the environment. It helps do something called ta'yin al-rawi. So if I have a narrator named Muhammad ibn Abdullah, how many Muhammad ibn Abdullahs do you think are in the hadith literature? It's like thousands, right? So what is a way of helping to differentiate that? Where he's from, right? So if I can actually get the town of where he's from, and how is this going to benefit me if I find parallel chains in other books of hadith, right? So if I'm looking and I can't figure out who the narrator is, what is one of the benefits that I have? I can actually go to what? I can go to Ibn Majah, right? I can go to Ibn Majah and say, hey, does Ibn Majah narrate this hadith, and how can I benefit from it? Because I can now look into the chain and be like, oh, okay, this is where he's from. This is who the narrator must be, right? Because the chances of that Muhammad ibn Abdullah being from a Ray, for example, like it significantly narrows my search results. So like we said, there are about 1,300 hadith or so that are not found in the other books of hadith. Again, part of the reason is because of his search and his intention of including these hadith. So this is the end of the golden age, right? This is the end of the golden age. What happens after this is you have there's a more structured foundation of hadith terminology that comes after this. We had said up until this point, what are some of the major terms that we have become familiar with? So during the time of Bukhari and Muslim and Abu Dawud and Tirmidhi, etc. Hasan, was it here? The term Hasan, was it used? I want you guys to think about this. It was used in a different way. By who? By Imam al-Tirmidhi. He's the only one that used Hasan up until this point. The word Hasan was not used to grade hadith except by him. Other scholars didn't utilize it. What were the two terms that we said that Bukhari and Muslim were very familiar with? Sahih and Saqim, right? Sahih and Saqim. Sahih meaning accepted and Saqim meaning rejected, right? So these are the two terminologies that we have, and this is how the major classification was happening. The 5 classification system that we have today, right? Sahih, do you guys know them? Are you familiar? Sahih? All right, we'll get to that later. Hasan, Da'if, Da'if Jiddan, and Mawdu'. Right, so this is Ibn Hajar's classification. Sahih, Hasan, Da'if, Da'if Jiddan, very weak, and Mawdu', fabricated. Yeah. So this 5 classification system, it actually didn't come until Ibn Hajar. Before that, the classifications that they had were in general 2 categories. So even when Imam Ahmad, when he says that, and this is a point of contention, when Imam Ahmad says that I prefer using weak hadith over opinions of people, what does he actually mean? Again, this is a point of contention. I'm sorry? Weak, it could mean mursal, right? Which can mean disconnected, or a narration where the Sahabi is cut out, right? Depending on which scholar you're looking at, because they used it in both ways. So this evolution of the terminology is something that definitely needs to be recognized, and it definitely needs to be looked at. So what are some early works on the hadith terminology? You have a small work by Imam Humaydi. Imam Khatib al-Baghdadi, what he does in his Ma'arif al-Ulūm al-Hadith, he, no, I think it's Kifaya. Yeah, sorry, Kifaya, if you have no idea why. So what he does in his Kifaya is that he actually narrates and takes sections of earlier works, even though he's relatively later, right? So Khatib al-Baghdadi, he was 463, and a lot of these people were they were 200 years before him, right? So what he does is he'll mention sections of other books. Some of these are still with us today. So over here, Imam Muslim's introduction to his Sahih. This is, do we still have this today?
We studied.
We studied it, right? We spent time with it. If you guys say no, then I'm going to stop teaching. We had said that this is another thing that we should also look at, like Risala ila Ahl Makkah, right? So when we talk about Abu Dawud, he actually gives an introduction to his Sunnah. Right? He gives an introduction to his Sunnah. Imam Tirmidhi, he wrote his work on ilm. So ilm is something that started relatively early, because from the Imams of ilm, Imam Ahmad, Imam Bukhari, Imam Tirmidhi, Nasa'i, right? These are all Imams of ilm, of advanced hadith criticism. So this is a science that actually developed relatively early. So in the 4th century, let's see who came about. So you have Imam al-Nisaburi, you have Ibn Hibban, al-Tabrani, Daraqutni, and Abu Nu'aym al-Isfahani. So these scholars, well known, you guys might be familiar with the middle 3, maybe less so with the first and last. Imam Nisaburi, he has a very famous tarikh. Abu Nu'aym, I think he has a mustakhraj. Ibn Hibban, he has a famous, I don't know if you guys are familiar. Right, Mustadrak, no, Mustadrak was Hatim. Ibn Hibban has his Sahih. Imam al-Tabrani, he has his Saghir, Awsat, and Kabir. And Imam Daraqutni, he has his most famous work is actually his book on ilm, even though he has his own sunnah. So you have a sunnah at Daraqutni. You find that the hadith sciences is actually weakening. So during the Golden Age, people actually, you had thousands of students going to study hadith. Like in the following era, it declined significantly. Why? Right? Most of the hadith were written. Right? Most of the hadith had been recorded by this point. So now people, the reason that they wanted to go study hadith is what? Right? Either to have your own work, right? To have your own published independent work. And now that all the hadith have been recorded, what addition am I going to make what contribution am I going to make to the hadith encyclopedia? It's not much, right? There's not much I can do. There's very little gaps that I can actually work in. And we'll find that that's exactly what happened here. And not just that, what is the other problem I'm going to run into as a student of hadith in the following generation? The chains, right? The chains. What is going to happen to the chains? They're going to get significantly longer. And when the chains are getting longer, who else is getting involved? I have more narrators, and these narrators, finding out about those narrators, is it easier or harder? Right? Because you have more people narrating, the chains are getting longer, investigating those narrators. So is it realistic for me to keep that same criteria that the previous imams kept? It becomes hard, right? It's not a realistic solution to figure out, like, okay, how do I go about, like, okay, now I have like 10 people. Instead of dealing with 3, 4, 5, 6 people between me and the Prophet ﷺ, I'm dealing with like 10, 12, 15 now. And many times I can't even find out about those narrators. Right? I don't have any biographical information about them. It becomes extremely challenging. For them, they might have had access, but they would have to travel significantly more. They'd have to travel significantly more to find out about these particular narrators. So, like we said, studying hadith actually they started losing popularity. And in the 4th century, what science do you guys think picked up? Yeah. And not only did it pick up, like fiqh flew, right? Fiqh became the ultimate science to study. If I wanted, like today, if I want my child to be successful, I would send him to be like an engineer or a doctor. At this time, you know where they sent their kids to study? Your Sharia, right? They would send their kids to study Sharia. Why? Jobs. Like all the government jobs were in Sharia. If I wanted to be a judge, if I wanted to be a scribe, if I wanted to be a paralegal, if I wanted to be anybody who's involved in the judge scene, anybody who's involved in any type of governance, I would have to at the least study Sharia, right? It wasn't so much an academic endeavor as it was one for many people who were trying to get jobs and trying to work. So what happened with the attendance? So Ibn Battah, he mentions that they were sitting in the majlis where there were 30,000 scribes. And after a short time, he found that there were only 10,000. And then he said, where did everybody go? Right? So he found people who were sitting down, who were attending, and he turned around, and all of a sudden he sees most of the people were missing. He's like, what happened? Again, the popularity of Hadith sciences had gone down for the reasons that we had mentioned, right? It became that much more challenging. It became that much more difficult as time went on. And not just that, you had less people who were willing to contribute. You had less patrons. So during the time of the imams, you had patrons, right? So you had governors, and sometimes you'd have wealthy people. What would they do? They would pay for somebody to go and study, and they would spend their time doing that. In this era, all of these factors definitely played like a huge role in kind of discouraging people from studying Hadith. And it's also in the same era that you have the rise of what's called the gharib culture. And in this era, now that all of the major Hadith are recorded, the only chains that are left are going to be what? The well-known ones? No, they're going to be like the really strange, unique ones. And we already said that once I see a narration as strange or unique, that's what? It's a red flag. That's the first red flag. And that first red flag, it usually means what? That those hadith are going to be weak or sound? Huh? Weak, right? They're most likely going to be weak. Is it possible a few of them are sound? Absolutely, but most likely they're going to be weak. So what happened is that you have Hormuzi, he writes what's considered the first canonical book in Mustalah al-Hadith. And he calls it al-Muḥaddith al-Fasil bayn al-Rawi wal-Wa'i. And he says that this is actually the boundaries on what a muhaddith is and what he's supposed to do and what he's supposed to teach and how he's supposed to study. And what does he talk about? SubhanAllah. Like his opponents were actually two. There are two groups of people he was addressing. He was addressing the Muḥaddithīn, the scholars of Hadith, and he was also addressing the Mu'tazila. Why? Why address the Mu'tazila? He was bored and he was like, let me talk. I need to talk about someone else too. Because the Mu'tazila, one of their base arguments is what? Is to undermine which tradition? Well, I won't say that's not their goal, but one of the major problems was what? Right? The Hadith, they actually attack the Hadith tradition. They say that the Hadith we take they have to be mutawatir. And a vast majority of the Hadith corpus is what? The opposite. It's actually Ahmad. So he's addressing them, saying that what gives you the right to dismiss Hadith? You have no right to do that. And he attacks them. But out of his fairness, he also attacks the Muḥaddithīn. He said, you guys have stopped studying Lugha. You stopped studying the language. Your Arabic is weak. And he said, you spend all your time chasing after these lone and weak narrations. He said, this is not what the Muḥaddith is supposed to do. So you see what he did there? Like, he's trying to bring balance back to the force. To the Hadith, to the Hadith culture, right? He's trying to bring that balance back, saying that you guys are not spending your time. You are supposed to be scholars of Hadith and students of Hadith. You're not spending it the way that it should be. You should be preserving the tradition that we have today, instead of going and trying to become famous by having all these gharib and fard and nisbi Hadith. You should have the ones that are well known. These are the ones you should be spending your time with and recording and teaching. And you need to be versed in the language. Why? Because the Hadith is in the language. And if I don't know what I'm narrating, then who am I truly benefiting? And then he attacked the Mu'tazila, saying that you guys can't. What gives you the right to dismiss Hadith? Hadith is something that is essential to our tradition. It's essential to our Islam. And you guys are just throwing it away like it has no value. So this is why it's actually a really good book. He doesn't go into terminologies, right? It's not what we consider to be a classic muṣṭalaḥ book. It's not a terminology book. That's not what the point is. But because he mentions some terminologies in his chapter headings, the many scholars of hadith, they put it as the first book of muṣṭalaḥ, or the first book that was done hadith terminology. And the next book we have is by Imam Hatim, who also very famously is the author of al-Mustadrak. Al-Mustadrak is considered to be from the last chain, I won't say the last, but toward the end tail of the scholars that put a condition on their books of hadith that they are what? Sahih. It's called al-Mustadrak al-Sahihain, right? So, and he has his Ma'rifat ulūm al-Hadith, and he actually spends more time in terminology. He actually mentions things like Sahih, Qawi, Jayyid. So a lot of the terms that, they die off, right? Like these terminologies, we don't use them anymore to grade a hadith. He brings them and he actually talks about them. So it's an excellent reference for me to actually look at the lens of classical works and classical books. When they make a hukam on their hadith, what can I do? I can go back to Imam Hatim's book and I can actually get an explanation of what those terminologies actually mean. This is a question I want to spend a little bit more time on next week, but I want to give you guys time to make wudu, inshallah. But we'll leave this question for next time, inshallah. Basically, okay, well, you're saying that people need to focus on these hadith. Is there room for us today to actually make rulings on a hadith? Is there space for that or not? This is a longer discussion that we'll spend time with next week, inshallah. Huh? The answer is yes, but it's conditional. Spoiler alert, right? Any questions before we end today? Yes. Can you create your own? Yes, you will just be known as a fabricator.